Hello, welcome. I'm Sarah Pletts, longtime Aspen artist and resident, and we are here to discuss 2A or not 2A. That is the question. And I'm here at wonderful GrassRoots with an old friend and a man who loves the arts and knows what it takes to make them happen, Mr. Paul Menter.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi. Thank you so much for being here today.
I'm glad to be here. I think this is going to be fun.
Yeah, it is. And Paul is the former Aspen finance director from 2002 to 2007, and currently an Aspen Daily News columnist, right?
That's correct. Every Wednesday.
Every Wednesday.
Every Wednesday.
Woo, that's a big commitment.
Yep.
So we're going to start out this conversation. I'm so glad it's you.
I'm glad it's me too.
I want to tell you folks, this gentleman knows about finance and he loves art, and I've known that since I met him when he first came here in 2002. So first of all, we're going to define Measure 2A, and would you do the honors in telling our audience what that is?
Certainly. So 2A is a measure that's been put before the voters of the city of Aspen that requires a 60% majority to pass. And what it does is it alters the use of an existing tax, the real estate transfer tax that was put in place in 1979 to support the Wheeler Opera House and arts in Aspen. And as you know very well, because you and your mother were around at the time it happened, the amount of support that was allowed to come from this tax for the arts was limited to $100,000 by the original ordinance. The primary thrust of this initiative, or this ballot measure, it's not an initiative, this ballot measure would be to eliminate that restriction. And it's very short. And so I'm actually just going to read it really quickly,
perfect.
if that's okay. So what it says is, shall ordinance number 19, series of 2021, which if approved by at least 60% of the electors voting, will continue the use of the Wheeler Opera House real estate transfer tax for the benefit of the Wheeler Opera House, will allow for the use of the Wheeler Opera House real estate transfer tax for the purpose of supporting the cultural, visual, and performing arts, including the capital and operational support of the Red Brick Center for the Arts, and will remove the current limitation of $100,000 of the grant funds generated by the tax for the purpose of supporting cultural, visual, and performing arts, including the support of the Aspen Red Brick Center for the Arts, be approved. So it's intended, they add the word cultural. Visual and performing arts were originally included in the measure, and they eliminate that restriction. And of course, the Red Brick Center is the Center for the Arts that is owned by the city, which we're in right now.
Which we are, yes,
Yeah.
we are in right now. We're in GrassRoots TV.
Yeah.
And I do want to address that Mom and I were here in 1979, and my mom, Janet Garwood, worked with you and others on finance and arts, and I was lucky to be in a collaboration with her. So I learned a lot as an artist working with her. And I do want to point out that in that original tax, we really wanted half of it to be for the visual and performing artists that live here, and the groups that, the individuals and nonprofit artistic groups that function here in Aspen function very well. And the Opera House was falling down. A lot of people don't know that. It was really a wreck, and we wanted to fix it. So it was never meant to be primarily for structures or administrative salaries. It was meant to, for half of it from the beginning, to be for working artists.
Right.
And that is really why I'm here today with you, because that changed drastically in our community. Many of us know that the situation for actually creating here has, well, let's say it's dried up, and we're hoping that this is something that might replenish that.
Right.
But I'm here today to discuss not just whether or not it will pass, lifting that ceiling will happen now or in the future. I want to discuss primarily today, if and when it does pass, how those funds will be distributed and by whom.
Right. And you've gone to great lengths to let the mayor and council know your perspective on that.
Yes.
That and my understanding is, and you should probably talk about this a little bit, is that you believe that there should be an arts council that has kind of delegated that responsibility. Am I right about that?
Yes.
Okay.
I really do. I'm an international producer. I'm working on a project now for here and the UK. I never leave my community out. I always engage. A project I'm working on, I work on it in Colorado. This is my home, and I take it wherever in the world I'm lucky enough to get to take it. And the reason I'm in this position is I was nurtured here in Aspen in those early years when I was asked, Sarah, what are you working on? Would you like to open up? We'll add a little bit to the early part of a theater season so that you can try out a new play. I was nurtured here as an artist. And I want to see that happen again because my concern right now is someone in their 30s that wants to do what I did 35 years ago. Was it really that long? Oh, dear. There's not a structure for that right now. That doesn't exist.
And the city council has always maintained very close control over the allocation of grant funds, not just for the arts, but for other nonprofits as well. I mean, as you and I discussed, when I was very surprised when I started as finance director in 2002 to discover that I was the de facto grants officer for the city.
Okay,
the city didn't have a grants officer.
Let's be clear on this. So what happened was you were hired to be the finance director, which you're very good at, and you came here and they said to you, the city council said to you.
Well, I mean, it was obviously with the city manager.
Oh, okay.
As part of the budget process, your responsibility is to coordinate and manage a volunteer citizen review committee to review grant applications to the city from all the nonprofits. And it's not an insignificant amount of money. It was over $1 million, I think, at the time in total, and it's gone up since then overall. And I have no training in, certainly in managing an arts organization or in understanding those issues. So I learned a lot. And I was actually, grateful for the opportunity to learn, but it was de-emphasized. It felt to me as though that part of the city's budget process was de-emphasized as more of a ministerial process rather than one that was substantive. And we did a lot of work with the county. Nan Sundin, who's about to retire, and I worked together to put together a joint grant application. We did a lot of work. I think we improved it. But the piece that is relevant here is, the $100,000 limitation on RET funds that can be used for arts and cultural and visual and performing arts grants from the RET has never changed since 1979. Meanwhile, RET revenue has exploded.
Yes, I understand.
And the other piece is that the $300,000 that the city allocates from earned revenue at the Wheeler that also supplements grant funding for nonprofits, for arts nonprofits, that number has not gone up in many, many years.
And this is a problem. This needs to change.
And so in a sense, moving down your little agenda here that you put together, that I think is on the good side of the ledger for this, right? Because the city is asking the voters, do you want to give the city more flexibility to fund more arts and cultural and visual and performing arts activity, nonprofit activity in your community generally. But they, of course, leave the responsibility for that to the council because the council's always had that responsibility, and they really, it's very clear that from the measure, that they don't intend to give that up or to delegate that.
Okay, so the reason I went in, I'm here with you, and the reason I went in last week on October 12th, and I believe you can look at this if you want to. It was a recorded regular meeting, and I proposed to them that the way, we all know this in our community here, the phrase that I hear quite a bit is our spirit has dimmed, and I think it's because that we have neglected to fiscally emotionally support the artists, the scholars, the writers. We have still phenomenal people in this community. And I want to be very honest, we've lost some of those people in the last decade. They've been forced to go elsewhere to survive because they're professionals and they're creative. And I don't want that to continue. I would love to see more money go to the artists, but we need in place something that's going to tell us. The way I phrased it to the council last week is public responsibility, public policy went awry on the arts over the last decade, at least. And we need assurance, some kind of assurance here that it's going to be spent more wisely. Also, not only that it needs to be spent more wisely, perhaps by a council that's also that's artistically wise and fiscally responsible. What about this, the flexibility of that RETT tax? Again, for those of you watching, it's a real estate transfer tax originally meant for the visual and the performing arts and to fix and maintain our opera house. So,
well, you know, a little bit of a background. The way this whole initiative got started was there was a citizens group that proposed that petitioned the community. They didn't get enough signatures to put their measure on the ballot, but their intention was to have a measure that essentially split the RET, so that 50% remained with the Wheeler Opera House, and then 50% would go to arts programs for the schools, if I remember correctly. I think that's right.
Okay.
And that didn't get enough signatures to get on the ballot.
Okay.
And I think it's fortunate that it didn't, and I wrote this in my column a couple months ago, back in August, because the RET, while it generates a lot of money, it's a notoriously volatile source of income because it fluctuates based upon the real estate economy.
Right.
And it has, if I analyzed collections from 2001 to 2020, and it has what's called a standard deviation, which is the amount, the percentage of the average amount that collections are expected to vary from year to year. And the standard deviation for the RET over that time period is 0.4, which is 40%. So to take 50% of a tax and allocate it to some other undefined purpose, when it may vary by as much as 40% in any given year, is really a dangerous precedent.
Okay, but I'm going to jump in here and I'm going to talk about something I've watched evolve in the community.
Well, one last thing though. So that I think drove the council to try and come up with what they saw as a more reasonable ballot measure that to put in front of the citizens, which is I think what they've tried to do: put a simple, straightforward ballot measure together that leaves control of the allocation of the money to them, but lifts the restriction on the $100,000 restriction on the RET.
I see. So in a year where we had much less income from the RETT, we may need to put 60% into our structures. Like a new studio here for GrassRoots, but but in another year,
thank you for that shameless
60,
plug as a board member.
Well, I mean, we're here at the grace of this amazing place, and you know, and still operating. And hey, I run a small nonprofit. It has been the most challenging last 2 years in our 38-year history, and I am very lucky that my door is still open, and it's only open a crack. So I understand this, but my concern is that over the last really 15 years, it went, when there was more money, it got smaller to the arts, and I don't mean art in general, I mean the creative part of the arts, and more went to administrative salaries. That's a big bee in my bonnet, and structures. And I think it's about our mindset. We have to really think about how we value creativity.
Yep. Understood. Yep. I agree with that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Are we on to the good points yet?
So I think we're on to the good points.
Oh, wow.
So you know,
what could happen? What could be the great thing? So if voters go out and say, lift the restriction, let's put more money into the creative and performing and visual arts.
Right.
What could happen?
Well, I think on the positive end, I think that lifting the restriction will certainly, almost certainly, will result in significantly more money going to the arts from the city. And I think that's a good thing. We'll talk about the concerns later, but I think that's positive. That's a positive move. The first time that I ever heard someone propose the idea of repurposing existing taxes at the city of Aspen was in 2008 when Mick Ireland, when he was mayor, commissioned a citizen budget task force, and I facilitated that the year after I left the city. I was finance director until 2007, and during the year 2008, I facilitated that group. And one of their suggestions to the city at the time was, rather than just propose new taxes, see if there are ways to ask the voters to make better use of the taxes that we have. This is an example of that that's finally coming before the voters. And there have been a lot of discussions of it over the years. That was the first time I had heard it. May have been proposed before that by somebody else. I don't know. And it wasn't my idea, but it came from the group. So I think that it's good, and I think that's a good thing as well. The city's trying to make good use of its money in a changing environment. And it's lifted that restriction and it's provided more flexibility. And I think that will result in more money going to the arts. Those, I think, are very good points. I also wanted to point out that in its staff report, the city staff, under the signature of Sarah Ott, the city manager, they do make a nod to small local arts nonprofits as being deserving of additional funding. Now, there's nothing in the measure that requires that money go to smaller local arts nonprofits, but the staff at least
how big is a nod?
Well, exactly. Well, they wrote it's in the staff analysis that they want to be able to bring to build into their process an opportunity to have more of that. That I saw that in the staff report, and I think that's a positive.
Recently.
Yeah, it's in their staff report from August, from when the council was considering the ballot measure, before they had actually brought it forward.
As the director of a 38-year small nonprofit, and by the way, when you give money to a smaller nonprofit, my experience is you get a bigger bang for your buck.
Well, you get a bigger bang for your buck. You also get more diversity, right? And you get more interest and more, just more interest and more fun and more vibrancy because you've got all these different organizations doing things. So, so I think it's really important. And you and I have had this conversation, right? I mean, we've talked about this a lot recently in preparation for this discussion. That I think we both feel that to a great extent, the arts community in Aspen, while there are elements of it that are very strong, other elements of it have kind of been hollowed out.
Actually, they have been hollowed out, not kind of.
Yeah,
they've been
right.
dug and moved.
Right, because there's as the community has grown and become this international resort community, and the cost of living here has gone up, the cost of everything has gone up. It's become more and more difficult for small local artists to just survive. And I mean, the building we're sitting in is an effort that the city made almost 20 years ago when the red brick was created to try and address that issue. This, I think, it can be another one, but there's no evidence in the measure that it will be another one.
Right, and I've had discussions with. Private discussions with two of the council members, and I'm not convinced yet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, here I am, a lifelong arts person. I just turned 70, and I've spent 43 years of grounding and founding my art here in this community. And I'm still on the fence about this because it needs to, where it goes needs to change. How it's spent needs to change in order to get our spirit back, in order to make us strong again. Because I think, now we're going to get into this discussion, I guess.
Before we get to that, do you think, are there any good points that you can think of that I didn't mention?
Well,
because you kind of nodded that over to me, and I just want to make sure we don't move on until you have a chance to.
Thank you. This is it's challenging. It's actually tough for me to get hopeful again. Mm-hmm. And the truth is, the way that we creative individuals have been treated here it kind of made me not to want to go in that room again. We talked a little bit earlier about saying we're for the arts, but really being and committing to the people who bring us art.
Right.
I mean, it's gotten more popular to bring famous singers from England, and that's fantastic to see somebody like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But nurturing our own artists, it's not just about making someone who knows how to get up and be on a stage.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons, I'm going to be very honest here, one of the reasons I did not sell my studio was because, believe me, it got really tough to be here. It got emotionally and artistically difficult to work because I felt dismissed. And the amazing people I worked with felt that way. And, we make art according to how we feel.
Right.
But I saw a woman walking past my studio one day in the park. I thought, it's too hard. I'm just going to sell and go. And I saw a look on her. I watched her face, and she looked up at my studio, and I could tell that she said to herself, "Oh, that poet, I don't know who she is. That woman that dances, she still lives there."
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I saw it on her face, and I thought,
Right. So this is very personal to you.
well, yeah.
Yes, this is very well. I think it's important to say for the audience that this is how personal this really is, but it's not. It's about. But there used to be a lot of people like you,
Yeah.
and now there's you, and maybe a few other people. There are a few other artists
There
here
are.
that have studios here in the Red Brick and in the community that
Right.
work hard and are able to make it. But it's not a flourishing, growing, kind of community at this point, in your view, right?
Right. And I said this the other day in city council in the office because it's our city.
Right.
And I want young people now to know, go in there, talk, speak up, don't be afraid. I've asked people to come here and speak, and there's a kind of fear,
Yeah.
People are reticent about speaking up, afraid they might not have the income that they're barely getting by on,
Right.
It's an atmosphere that's so difficult. I've already lost my job, so I can't lose mine. I mean, it's
there's kind of this undercurrent on everything these days, right? About will this issue become politicized, and if I'm on the wrong side of this issue, is that going to cost me something? And so I think on any issue that goes to the ballot, that's a concern for people, a lot of people. I think you're right, and that's unfortunate.
And I want to say something about it being personal for me. It's not, when you're an artist that works with a lot of collaborators and inspires a lot of students, it's not just about that individual artist.
Right.
I mean, I see someone that I taught at community school 30 years ago, and he's gone off to Switzerland, and he thought he was going to be a banker, and he shows up in my parking lot, and I don't recognize him, but he recognized me, and he says, "Sarah, I'm back. I'm home." Our lives as creative people touch a lot of people. Our job really is to spark that feeling of being alive, that feeling you get why you buy a ticket. If you got so much money left, and you go see a new film because
Right.
you're excited.
Right.
You're excited to be alive. So it's personal, but my life in the nonprofit way that I've worked touches a lot of people.
Right. So there's a couple things on the agenda
Okay.
on the list here that you put
Yeah.
under good points that I think are really important.
Okay.
And I don't want to steal your thunder on them. So 3A and 3B, I think you should mention those.
Okay. So in the good points, I've watched many people use this word. I've watched corporate thinking invade the arts, right? And so I looked up the antonym of that because, we all have an idea of what that means, especially here in the United States. We call it Turtle Island. Native Americans call this Turtle Island. I looked up the antonym, and the antonym, or the opposite definition of corporate thinking, is very interesting. The first definition in, I think, Webster's is mutual cooperation and protection, which I find very interesting.
Yep.
Because history proves tyrannies fall, and we are really safer in the long run when we watch out for each other.
Yeah.
And that means everybody.
Yep. Yeah. And this kind of came out of the context of a conversation that you and I had about the kind of the stratification of everything in Aspen, including the arts community. And there are elements of the arts community that have been very successful, but they're the very well-to-do, moneyed nonprofits that by and large serve donors and serve visitors, and they're very important to the community.
Very.
And they're very valuable, and they do a great job. But they are a part of the arts community, and I'm the one who I think used the term in our conversation of corporate, right? That they're it's more of a corporatized kind of approach to art, and then you took that and you went and you looked for the opposite of that, which I thought was really smart of you to do, and
you.
very and I think you're right. I think that that is a good way of defining what's been hollowed out. That sense of mutual cooperation and protection in the community has been hollowed out in a lot of ways. One of those ways is in the arts community, but it's not limited to that. But that's what we're talking about now.
Yeah. So that when I'm glad to hear that staff was thinking that way about the so-called smaller arts groups. And then this is a phrase that I included that you brought up, and it's art for art's sake. I am now the bottom line in my life. My mom was my business partner, and she was good at business, and I've had a very interesting 2.5 years to keep my 2 mortgages paid and work some. I mean, I've done a lot of growing up since my mom passed, but she's with us today, I think. Art for art's sake. So what does art for art's sake mean? What does that mean?
Right. So is that rhetorical, or you're really asking me?
No, I'm asking.
Well, art for art's sake is, what do people in the community want to do to express themselves, and it's self-expression. In my view, and I'm not an artist. This is not my field. It's not my wheelhouse. But I think it's been discounted, not just in Aspen, everywhere, but certainly in Aspen, and it needs to be a larger part of the community, and people need to see it as something that's important. That people should be encouraged to produce their own art, whether it's for their own enjoyment, for the enjoyment of their family, for the enjoyment of their school, for an event, for whatever purpose. It's very, very important that it be honored and respected. And I think that it is, to the extent that it occurs, it's honored and respected. What's happened is that the opportunity for it to occur has been kind of crowded out of the economic environment in Aspen.
So someone's listening and they're thinking, should I or shouldn't I vote for this lifting of the ceiling? It's a tough one for me because it needs to be lifted. And I said this before, and I'm going to repeat it because for me it's the big issue. As a community, and I suppose I'm going to have to, when I get down to it and I have to decide how I'm going to vote, I guess I'm going to have to trust our council members that they're listening to us, that they're in agreement.
This gets to the challenges, right, that we talked about.
Okay.
And that's point number 4 in the agenda that you put together, challenges, which are, what are the things that might cause somebody to not want to vote for this? It's the repurposing of an existing tax. It's not an additional tax. It doesn't raise anybody's taxes. It repurposes taxes, and it provides the city with the opportunity to evaluate the needs and to distribute those dollars as the city council sees fit to meet those needs under really pretty broad criteria, which are pretty much unchanged from the original ballot measure in 1979, with the exception of the addition of the word cultural to visual and performing arts.
Actually, I'm going to disagree
So-
with you on that in terms of the repositioning, because when we set this up initially, we really envisioned that. I understand why you can't do the 50% every year because it's a variable amount. But we really knew, and I talked with John here at GrassRoots about this earlier, you can't just focus on fixing the room. You got to pay the people that are going to be in the room, right? Unless you just want administrators. But I mean, we have a great example here.
Right.
You're an amazing person in finance who loves and respects art, and I invited you because every time I'm with you, I feel like I matter. I feel like my creativity is valued. I know that you value it. I mean, I meet with
Well, thank you.
other people that are actually in administrative arts positions in the community who literally, to be kind, have not been taught how to value someone like me who's in a I don't know what I'm going to do field, because
Right.
to be a good artist, we have to be open and we have to be experimental. And and somebody says to me, well, what are you going to do in that room? And, the best answer, if I've finished another project, is I don't know yet until I get in there.
Right.
And somebody who's worried doesn't like that answer.
Right. Yeah.
But, I would like for the administrators in our creative spaces to be actually the way I've been treated here at GrassRoots, and to say, we got to trust you because somebody's got to figure out where we're going.
And this is the issue that we talked about, that you and I talked about quite a bit in advance of this, which is under challenges, which is, what are the influences the city council is reserving for itself in this measure through their budget process, the authority to allocate this money to individual organizations as they see fit. That is completely within their purview. And you and I discussed this. These are good people. They're not intending to do anything nefarious, but they are not people that have an expertise in the arts necessarily, and they are politicians who are influenced. And it's not unusual for ballot measures that are brought forward typically by citizens who would be more in an advocacy position than a city council. City councilors aren't advocates, right? So there's no reason to expect that they would have done what you wanted them to do with this, in my view. But you would feel better about this, I sense, if there were more, maybe a little more structure around how the dollars were allocated, and that there was an arts council or a group that was educated in the arts and dedicated to the community that had a role built into the measure. You would feel better about that.
And also, I don't like that if it doesn't pass, that if I understand this correctly, the Opera House has just more money flowing into the structure, because that's a big issue in many performers in this community. And I've spoken to, several, not to exaggerate, in the last 3 weeks, and we're very disappointed about not having access to perform or try out a new play or be in our own opera house. So that's a big problem.
Well, it's another example of that crowding out that's happened incrementally over the years, right?
Right.
And almost imperceptibly in the eyes of a lot of the people who are responsible for managing these programs day to day, because they've got their nose to the grindstone. They're working every day trying to just move forward. They've got influencers and managers and supervisors of their own that have their own interests.
Okay,
and there's a lot of momentum in a certain direction that's been going on for a long time in the arts community.
And
in
that
Aspen.
needs redirecting. I mean, that really needs to change in order for this, regardless of who does what, in order for our community to feel inspired,
Yep.
jubilant, excited about going into an arts venue again. We have to infuse it with creativity. Not, there's a misnomer that an arts building is an arts building if it's not full of people creating and making art. And,
Right.
We've had another instance of a large health issue, which I know has slowed down things here somewhat in the Red Brick, but still, if I were the arts administrator here in this building right now, I'd be taking that salary and canvassing every artist I could to get into that dance room and start writing and teaching and exploring again. That's what I'd be doing, because we need that. And I hope that we can teach our creative administrators, for those that haven't been taught that, to do that. And I was very clear with our Mayor Tory. I'm not asking to lower the standard of level of payment to our amazing city workers, but I'm asking to rise ours up to meet it. Ours need to be met because we're just as important.
Right.
And I think Aspen's been built on a reputation. I had the good fortune to perform with Hunter. I mean, Hunter Thompson made me brave, he made me brave. And I worked with John Denver for a number of years doing marketing, graphics, many things. Someone said the other day, they started to say, you're so lucky to work with. I said, wait a minute, John was lucky to work with me. We were lucky to work with each other.
Right. Yep.
We still have some of us who are not quite relics here that know how to create international performances and all kinds of exciting things.
Yep. So when it comes to the distribution of the funds, it will be, if this ballot measure passes, it will be up to the city council, and they will be able to use their budget process or amend or change their application process or add to it in some way to kind of direct their staff to kind of manage it in a way that is directed towards what they think is important. One of the things that I will give a nod to the folks who proposed the initial citizen initiative is that in most communities, an appreciation of the arts, it starts in two places, right? It starts in the home and it starts in the schools. And, both of my daughters graduated from Aspen High School, and I think they did the school district here did as much as they could with the money they had. But the arts program here in Aspen, Colorado, surrounded by all this opulence and wealth, the music program, the arts program, the performing arts program, theater, it didn't hold a candle to what I was used to. And I grew up in suburban Cincinnati, and we had a great arts program. And every year the musical was a big community event. If you had kids in school or not, everybody went to the musical, and they did, 6 or 7 performances and that kind of thing. And there is a real need, if you're going to really rebuild the core of appreciation for the arts in Aspen. I think a dimension of that also has to be with the schools. I don't know how they do that, but that's something that I think is important.
You do an artist in residence program in the schools. We did that before. We took our choreographers. The way we got the recycling center is we sent 12 to 15 artists into science classes, into environmental classes, into art classes, and asked the students, how do you feel about what's happening to our environment? And kids made all kinds of things, and we filled the former art museum with just tons of stuff. I mean, the best part was, you don't know my environmental background. I'm working with John Denver and Jean-Michel Cousteau these many years. I've been a very strong advocate of the environment, and it's something I've learned here in Aspen, being able to work with these amazing people that love our environment So anyway, the kids, two groups of kids made fish masks, and then I helped other kids build up a riverbank. It was pretty high, about this high, and so we had some skateboards, and kids took a fish mask, got on the skateboard, swam through the river, and other kids stood on the river and tried to hit the fish kids in the head with a Coke can on a string. It was so much fun. But they got, they realized, and this was with the schools, they realized, man, I throw something away in a river, I hit a fish on the head.
Yeah.
We kept the museum open another hour because they were having so much fun. They made the art, they played it out. It was extraordinary.
Yeah.
And we did that in the schools. I'm animated about this, but I also want to get very sincere right now about what you just said about our Arts in the Schools program. That is extremely serious because our young people need to be with creative people to bring out their true selves. I mean, this also relates to mental health. The statistics show that if you invest in creativity, that the community's well-being is much stronger.
Right.
Because they work it out.
Right. They learn the coping skills, and they learn the ability to work it out with others.
Yeah, I mean, years ago in the community school play, when I went to the school and I said, all right, I'll do your play this year, because the woman that did it normally was on sabbatical. I said, but I never tell kids what to say. They're going to write it. And they looked at me like, excuse me? I go, yeah, well, they all improvise. I record it all. I put it together in the most mishmash, crazy script you could imagine.
Right.
But they wrote it.
Right.
And they were invested in it. And it was amazing to see what came out of that. And there was one kid that was, making a lot of noise. And the people from the school, brilliant educators, came to me and said, you've lost your voice, you got to take him out. And I said, you told me no kid gets left out. And I went to this kid, and he was sabotaging things, and I said, this is theater. You can do whatever you want. And he was very upset. And I said, well, what do you want to do? He goes, I don't want to do any of that stuff you suggested. I said, fine, what do you want to do? And he told me that he was having terrible trouble in his life, and that he felt like he was dragging this heavy burden. I said, can you get a refrigerator box? And he looked at me like, he was 15, he's a strong boy. He goes, yeah, what would I want to do that for? I said, get it, paint it like a brick, get it in here tomorrow, and drag it across the back of the stage in the scene. And he said, excuse me? I said, this is theater. Do it on stage with the rest of us. He was the ringleader in that group. Oh, man, when he added that element to the play, the whole school just went into this fantastic, jubilant celebration of everybody. It's theater.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, exactly. So, in terms of distribution of funds, I think, there is nothing in the measure that requires the council to do it, but marshaling the force, if this is to pass, marshaling the forces of the community to advocate for such opportunities, to fund such opportunities, I think is really important, right? I think that's the place where that fits. And then finally, the last bullet item we've got here, future vision. So reigniting a genuine place for creativity, right? And that's what you just described. You just described a genuinely creative exchange that you had, and you freed that young man to express himself, and hopefully he took that and he was able to use that in other ways in the future.
Back in the days when I had a dressing room in my own opera house,
right.
I came out into the hall after I had calmed down because the performance was over, and there was a man waiting for me. And I went to introduce myself. I said, I know who you are. You're Sarah. You were Chris's teacher. And that father, years later, came to see me to tell me that young man, he's part Native American, he's Crow, I believe, has become an environmental leader. I mean, that was a tipping point in that boy's life.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And our kids need this. And I want to emphasize again not only the young folks in our schools learning about themselves, whether they go, whatever they field they go into. My dad graduated from Bowdoin College in Maine, and Bowdoin College still requires theater, art, writing. No matter, even as if you get a political degree from
Right.
Bowdoin in Maine, you have to study the arts
Yep.
because that's what makes us
Yeah.
a human being.
Yes, it does. What other thoughts on vision before we wrap up?
Okay, we're about to wrap up. Thank you for sticking with us, those of you who have vision. I think my final point is to question yourself when you're making contributions this year. If you're a donor, if you're a policymaker, if you're in finance, or if you're still in the arts, to really question how much of your, we'll call it a budget for simplicity's sake, goes into what you know is going to work, into the maintenance or the continued maintenance of a structure or facility, and how much are you really spending on taking a chance, on buying a painting from a young or new artist, on writing a check to put a new play on really where are we investing? I use the word invest, but it doesn't just mean money. It's like, or, to get money back in the future. Where is each individual putting what we need to value these things?
Right.
And to shift it over to taking, all right, a little less into what's fiscally responsible and a little more into what we really need as human beings.
It's really interesting because it's you kind of juxtaposition with fiscal responsibility. I don't think it's not fiscally responsible though to support the arts.
Good point.
I know where you're going with that though, because that's the argument you're arguing back against the argument that's been made against the arts. That's constantly made against the arts, exhaustively made against the arts. Right. It's just not fiscally responsible to spend tax dollars on this, that, or the other, and that in my view, there's a balance to everything, and I think we just moved a little too far, and I think it is time to move it back a little bit. But it is for all the reasons that you just expressed in terms of the value. There's great value. There's great community value in arts programs and in emphasizing the arts as an element of a community.
In fact, actually, a friend of mine has a master's in this. She does expressive art therapy. When we invest in our creativity, we have less mental health problems, less incarceration problems, and in the long run, investing in creativity may actually save us money. What an idea,
What a concept.
What a concept. I almost forgot about that.
Yeah.
Isn't that so when you're writing a check or telling your kid, you don't have to just do soccer. Hey, you want to go to a theater class? Go for it, that it may save us money.
Yeah, in the long run it may. It probably will. So.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so have we covered a future vision?
I think we have covered 2A or not 2A. So I personally, I'm a carpetbagger. I don't live in Aspen. I used to, but I don't anymore. I was the finance director. I don't live in Aspen. But I think that 2A I don't think it's perfect, but I think it's an improvement over the current situation. Wow. I think it sets a precedent for the city council to consider repurposing existing tax dollars to meet changing needs. I think that's very important in the long term. And I think it will result in improved allocation and distribution of monies to nonprofits. It'll be a political process in order to do that, and the work begins. If it passes, that's when the work begins, right? To advocate for.
Are you asking me to trust those folks that have ignored us for so long? Are you asking me to do that?
Well, you have to do. They're there anyway. You might as well give them the ability to do the right thing.
Okay, I didn't know you were going to put me on the spot. Can I get back to you on that answer?
You can. Of course you can.
Because I think we're going to have another discussion, I hope, with a producing artist, director of production in one of our groups, I hope. Okay, so for those of you that are still with us, thank you so much. Do get out and vote. I want to say that there will be another, I'm going to present again at the October 26th regular meeting before the election on how I might envision my suggestions for creating a arts council that's also fiscally engaged, let's say, not responsible, but engaged.
I like that.
And any of you out there, there's still chance, 3 minutes for each of us to talk at that October 26th meeting and put your 2 cents, 3 cents, $4 in on the 2A issue before it goes to vote.
Yep. Good advice.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, you're really, like I said, you're getting me back in the saddle.
Good.
I'm gonna. Should I make art again? I don't know.
Of course you should.
Oh, I don't know. It's made me a little bit short on the mortgage payment.
It's a great little video on YouTube that I saw of Edward Van Halen before he passed away, where he looks in the camera and he goes, "Keep playing. You got to keep playing. It's music. Got to keep playing."
Right.
So
keep playing,
keep painting, keep painting, keep
drawing,
dancing, keep doing it all.
Whew, okay, that I will do.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, GrassRoots. You're amazing. You're wonderful. You're still going. America's original. Oh, gosh. I can't get. How do I. Do you know?
America's original community access television station.
America's original.
The very first one right here, 1972.
Very first one.
50th anniversary next year.
50th anniversary of America's. Say it one more time.
America's original community access public television station.
Wow. How honored, huh?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And tune in again.